You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here for your Murder Mystery World Tour. And as we continue gearing up towards our finale for the year, I wanted to dive back into the archives once again and bring you a chat that Herds had with Aoife Clifford while himself and Cameron Furlong, our editor, were covering It Takes a Town. Recently returned from a grand tour of fame and fortune, local star Vanessa Walton is found dead in the cottage of MP Barton Langridge. And it's up to the whole town to solve the murder. I'll throw you over to Herds, talking with Aoife Clifford. Enjoy.
Aoife, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here, Herds.
It's great to have you. Now, let's get into things. Your book is concerned with the grisly murder of Vanessa Walton, a child star with a thriving career in the performance arts, at least, until she's found at the bottom of some stairs. She's been inevitably drawn back home to her doom. Do you think that even the biggest stars can get away from the place they grew up in?
Oh, that's a very good question. I suspect nobody does, really. I think that, the little bits of everyone's compass probably points back home. I mean, I know that's the case with me. I've lived away from my hometown of Bathurst for, over 30 years now, and yet I'm writing a book based in Bathurst. So not that I'm the biggest star in the world by any stretch, but I think childhood is so formative for everybody that what happens in childhood will stay with you. And I mean, my last book, one of the characters has early onset dementia, and it always interests me, having experienced family members with dementia, that the memories that are the hardest to go are the childhood memories, and they're the ones that stay when a lot of recent memories, even your adult memories, leave you. It's school events, it's childhood friends. My grandmother was always trying to escape the house and get home to her childhood home in Ireland to catch the train back. And so I think the answer is no, we never escape our childhood, no matter how big and important and however far away we think we are from it.
No, I think there's that, obviously, formative memories, and that time of relative innocence definitely stays with us. Now, I wanted to ask about Carol, right? She's a resident cop on the scene, and she's part of sort of the old guard. She dismisses Vanessa's death as definitely not a murder until she slipped a metaphorical note under the table by Janet, who's the town's spider on the wall. Why do you think it's important that murder in the town of Welcome, not Bathurst, importantly, start out as innocent?
I think part of it because it's a pretty good murder, so it's not obvious from the start at all. It looks like she's just fallen down the stairs, basically perhaps slipped on the stairs on some water because there's been a storm and there's been leaks. And so it looks like a terrible accident. I think also, and part of the thing I was thinking about, one of the things I was dealing with in this book was the idea of fame and being famous. And one of the things is we sort of forget that people are human beings as well. So somehow it's more shocking that a famous person dies than just your average person dies. And if you can remember far back as before the pandemic, it was seen as absolutely terrible and a tragedy, and we couldn't quite understand it when, like, David Bowie and Prince died quite soon after each other. And it was like really genuinely shocking that these people are actually human in a sense. And so I wanted to kind of play with that idea that we don't actually treat them as fully human. Somehow that the process by which we know them is a sort of a two-dimensional process. It's like through a screen or something like that. So we kind of treat them as if they're immortals. And so when something very human happens like death, we can't quite deal with it in the same way. Now, Vanessa's certainly not on the Prince or David Bowie scale, but kind of to the town she is, because she's the most famous person this town has ever had. And they've lived with her fame the whole time for as long as she has. And so she is seen as sort of special. And so when she's found sort of at the bottom of the stairs, they can't quite deal with it in a normal way. And so I wanted to play with all the ways that we kind of deal with death, which is something probably as a society we're actually not that great with dealing with in the first place. So I was playing around with those ideas, a bit like Princess Diana, died in a car accident, but yet all the conspiracy theories suddenly well up because it can't just be normal. So I wanted to play around with that idea that Carol's kind of trying to be sensible, going, well, there's no evidence here, and therefore is a bit initially dismissive of all the conspiracy theories that starts to bubble up from people like Janet, because especially when you're a cop, you're always dealing with crazy people telling you crazy ideas. And so she's waiting to see some evidence. When she starts seeing the evidence that there might be something going on, or it starts to seem a bit odder than it initially does, then she comes to accept that her initial response was wrong.
Yeah, I really enjoy Carol as a subversion of, and there's some debate about who the real detective is in this book, because it does take a town, as they say, obviously. But like, if we're looking for a detective character, a Sherlock Holmes stand-in, Carol kind of fits the bill. She's the cop investigating things, and she's competent. She's not a bumbling policeman like, say, Billy is. But I think it's interesting how you say that she's dismissive of the case, because she's also dismissive of her fellow police officers. She kind of forgets their names. And I think that Billy, who becomes her like police officer sidekick, we see him become more competent as the novel goes on. And I wanted to know, do you think this is due to Carol's raised expectations, or the seriousness of the crimes, Vanessa's fame, or something else?
Yeah, that's lovely that you saw that, because I wanted three-dimensional characters, that everyone to be rounded, and also to have your moment of competence and incompetence, because that is true to life and in different circumstances. So also I wanted to explore that journey with Billy. I also wanted to explore that journey with someone like Mur. So sort of people in the town who pretty much the town have written off, in a sense. So in relation to Billy, we're talking with a certain senior policewoman who's now retired, and she talked to me about what it's like to go to a new place and to be responsible for people, and how you judge that. And you see the cops that are kind of, her term was, and I think I might have used this exact term, was sort of put their pool cue back up in the rack. They're phoning it in, and people have just come to accept that. And Billy is that, he's a good-hearted person, he's a kind person, but he hasn't really been encouraged. And in fact, some of the other coppers are quite dismissive of him. And here's someone, Carol, who kind of says, no, I'm expecting more of you. And because he is a good person, he's doing his best to deliver that. And he does deliver in some ways, and he also stuffs up in other ways. But then in the moment, in the big moment, he really does deliver. With Carol, that's interesting that, like you mentioned, like at the start, she's forgetting people's names. That for me is that classic, I'm new to town, I've got to work out as much as I can. Are you relevant to me in this moment? No, you're not. I'm going to put it where it's relevant. I'm looking at a body. I'm trying to work out relationships in this town. Who owns this house, which becomes important? Who are they related to? Where's it all at? And so she's one of those people that within a year, she's going to know pretty much everyone's name in town. She'll get out there. She's a good, solid policewoman. I deliberately didn't want that Sherlock character of I'm the genius and I know everything and everybody else is the idiot. You just reflect my glory, basically. I wanted it that these are good people, like all of us in life. We're trying our best. It doesn't always work out for us. But if we work together, we'll get a bit further. So that was the idea.
It's like a whole town of Watsons, which is
100%. Which, I mean, come on, that's us, right? We're all Watsons, good-hearted, interested, and hopefully getting better.
Doctors, of course. Yeah,
of course.
No, I get you.
I love it. I'm a Watson.
Yeah. I'd love to be a Watson. Let's go. I actually really enjoy the structure of your novel because of the way that you weave this web of secrets so that all of these characters they're all Watsons and they can all kind of have a little piece of the puzzle that they can bring to the table as they go. But some characters, I'm thinking of Frankie right now with a box full of incriminating threats that she walks past the cops with, but characters make decisions that might not be best for the investigation and are even selfish, right? How have you approached the art of inconveniencing the investigation without frustrating the reader?
I guess I wanted each of those characters to have a really good reason why they were doing that. And even if it is that instant decision that you then think, oh my God, why did I do that? Then the character then reflects on it as well. So I wanted it to be believable. And in that moment, Frankie's got some good reasons not to do it because she stuffed up. When I started this novel, I started it with Frankie and her best friend, Mur. And I wanted to have a long-term friendship that then is tested when both of their worlds suddenly flip upside down. In a way, they probably think they're Sherlock Holmes and John Watson themselves in lesser forms because they're very, very different people. And the reason they're friends is they went to school together and they stayed in the same town. Now, that happens because it's that geographical friendship and those long-standing, you were talking about how important childhood, your childhood friends really know you and in a sense have to accept you. And no matter what sort of changes you do in life, they know you in a way that, even your spouse doesn't know you the same way because they met you at a very different stage of life. So that I wanted to really explore that really long form relationship because it almost is as important to you as a long-term partnership is. So I was really interested in exploring that. Now, Frankie and Mur being such different characters, I wanted a situation where, if you're looking objectively at them, Frankie is the person who succeeded. She is smart. She's a teacher. She's a respected person in the town. She's good and kind. She's got a loving husband. She's got 2 good kids. And she's kind of the good girl archetype into a good woman. Whereas Mur has failed at the one thing that she loved, which was swimming because of injuries. She's a bit more of a battler. She's working in the supermarket, which she kind of love-hates. And she's sarcastic. She's not the nicest person in the world, but she's good for a laugh. She probably drinks a bit too much. And even I wanted the reflection to be on that Frankie sometimes worried that she was sometimes too good a person because she was sort of being the good person in the relationship for Mur. And Mur could act out because she always knew that Frankie was there for her and that whether she's enabling some of Mur's more destructive behaviour. And I wanted a situation where those 2 women sort of look like they're fixed and then the murder happens and because of their relationship to the person murdered, sort of lots of things in their life flip upside down. And things that look like strengths in one scenario become weaknesses in the other. And also that Frankie, Little Miss Sensible, which Mur kind of jokes around about, starts being not Little Miss Sensible for good and for bad. So I really enjoyed that kind of reversal of fortunes. It's like this book starts the day after a storm, but it's like the storm, that Shakespearean idea of storm where suddenly everything's turned upside down and things that looked like was set in stone suddenly crumbles away and life can be suddenly very different and you need to respond to that.
I love the fact that Mur and Frankie are kind of the core of this novel, not knowing that going in and kind of warming up to them both, their differences, their strengths and weaknesses. You've created this odd couple-esque dramedy with the pair of them, drama comedy,
Yep.
coin that term. Do you think that their relationship could have continued on in a relatively stable manner if the storm had never occurred, if Vanessa's murder never happened and all these secrets hadn't come out? Do you think that relationship would have continued as it was, or was it inevitability that it'll be shaken in some way, I guess?
That's a really interesting question. I suspect there's a reasonable chance that it might not have been because it needed that storm to shake things up. But then life is full of storms. And if not this storm, something a little bit different, particularly because we're talking about some secrets in their lives that neither knew of the other. So there are things that are hidden, particularly Mur's hiding some stuff from Frankie. And being Mur, would she have eventually told her about that, which could have precipitated some of this? Or would she, her intention would be not to tell her because she knows her friend so well. She knows how devastating it would be for her friend. So I think there's a reasonable chance without this storm, but I just think life is full of storms and you're going to have your ups and downs. This one's a bit of a spectacular up and down, it must be said.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy, we won't get into full spoilers here, but I do enjoy how there's a note at the end of the novel after the all said and done that there are secrets that aren't fully uncovered. There's drama on the horizon as well, I guess. I don't know. I really enjoy the way that you've kind of written your book, that it's the events that happen in the novel aren't the end. There's still real life to happen afterwards. I guess I'd just like you to speak about how important that is to you, the after the book, I guess.
I always like that. I love writers that do that. I know it's not for every reader. There's some readers who want everything tied up, so wanted to know the answer to everything. My kind of view is a little bit different. I think obviously if you don't know who the murderer is at the end of the crime book, then it's probably not
Sure.
a crime book, quite frankly. But,
it's a problem, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
You'll know the big stuff, but usually in my books, there are going to be little bits that you're not going to know everything. And that is because I want it to reflect life. In life, there are many things that we don't get answers to. And I do completely understand that one of the attractions, particularly of crime fiction, is that there's an answer at the end. And that's a great comfort to readers and one of the main reasons that they read. But this book in particular, I loved being with the characters. So I wanted, in a sense, to hint at the life that goes further on beyond the book. So, so I don't normally do that, and probably did it a little bit more here. And that was just because I loved them too.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is that your previous novel, I think it's When We Fall, was a bit darker than this one. And not to say there's no darkness in this novel, but I'd like to know kind of what the process was like for you writing a lighter novel, this comedy focus.
Yeah. That was a deliberate choice. Often with the other ones, which I think, I hope there's kind of a sprinkling of humour in them, but often there was more humour in them. But then as I was editing it, I would often take it out. But this time that was really one of my goals, was to write a more humorous book, partly because I think the times we're in are so bleak that people kind of need a bit more, something a bit more lighthearted. I mean, I feel that myself. And when you settle down into a book that's got humour in it, it's such a lovely thing to read. Partly to challenge myself as well, and partly just to reflect life, to remember, like, a lot of life is very funny. Now, you look at, like, all the big stuff is not funny. Like, it's hard to find any humour in that. So it's kind of, you've got to find the humour in the small things. It was a really interesting process. Writing a funnier book is a challenge. Like, it is a lot harder to write a funny crime book than not, in part because all the elements to your usual crime book are serious, and we kind of have agreement over what is scary, what is sad, but what is funny is up for grabs, because what I find funny, you might not. And so that is a challenge. It's a really interesting challenge. I did kind of realize, I realized a couple of things about writing it. Like, I learned a lot through it, which I always enjoy. A couple of the things was, to name drop slightly, I did get to have a quick chat with Richard Osman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I talked to him about this dilemma and explained to him, what's funny when I write it the first time, by the time I've read it 8 times, isn't so funny to me anymore. And so it comes out. And he said that's because he never writes something to be funny. And I thought, yeah, that's it. So you put things in that might be funny, but they're also serving other purposes, so you can't take them out. And so whether they're funny or not is kind of the bonus. It's not where it's at. Now, there's some crime writers for sure that are writing to be funny. That is their purpose. But I learned all the different ways you can work with humour in your crime novels. So, for example, and this is from the start, so it's not a spoiler at all. So we've got Vanessa, who's dead, but Mer kind of thinks it's hilarious because she hates Vanessa. And she thinks it's really hilarious that Vanessa, who's been struggling in recent times and whose celebrity star's been on the wane, suddenly is a lot more famous because she's dead. And the live Vanessa would have loved that. But the dead Vanessa, it's neither here nor there. Mer finds that really funny. Now, you might, as a reader, find that funny or not, but that reveals a lot about Mer as a character. And so what we find funny is really revealing. And because I love characters that are changing and there's lots of elements to them, what they find humorous is a real reveal, and crime fiction's all about the reveals. The other thing is, and this is sort of the two-edged sword of humour, and it was something that my editor really pointed out to me, is you actually need a lot more things to happen in a funny crime novel. And that's why funny crime novels can often go into caper novels. This isn't a caper novel, but a lot of them are, is they need a lot of action because you don't have that kind of gothic horror tension element to them because you've laughed. And so you have to work out a way of allowing the laughs to be there as a release from the tension, and then having to up the tension again in a different way. Whereas, it's a lot easier to write the haunted house kind of mystery where nothing happens, but you're on the edge of the seat reading it. And in some ways, the fact that nothing's happening means that you don't get that release, and so you're even more tense going in. So there's a lot of techniques to it which I really enjoyed exploring in my writing, and that was a lot of fun, but it wasn't easy at all.
I'm reminded, as you're talking about what you've kind of elucidated there, Mer's statement about Vanessa being dead and being more famous now that she is, leans on the dark irony that I kind of felt throughout this whole novel. I feel like that's certainly my favorite aspect of the comedy in this book. Now, I want to ask, Mer is a really great character because she's deeply compelling as that screw-up underdog, but we can also kind of laugh at the messes she makes and those darkly ironic comments that she thinks up. What do you think it is about the bad decisions, I guess, that your characters make that keeps us smiling even when we see them dig themselves deeper into the hole?
Oh, well, I mean, it's interesting because we're interested in other people's failures. And sometimes we're interested because we feel a very human attachment to it. And sometimes in Mer and Frankie's relationship, part of the appeal for Mer is it makes Frankie feel better about her life because Frankie's got everything going on in her life and there's Mer who life's a lot messier. And so it can make you feel a bit superior, which is not an excellent part of human nature, but it nevertheless is present. So I think it's that, I mean, particularly very Australian is we want to go for the underdog. So we love to see the underdog win as well. So that it's complicated. I think part of it is superiority, part of it is identification. And it's interesting because even this week I was seeing another author sort of talking about, if you want to pitch yourself for podcasts, really be upfront about your failures because everyone's far more interested in your failures than your successes, which, I mean, I found that interesting because that's not necessarily what I'm interested in listening to. I don't know if successes is quite what it is, but there is something very human about feeling even someone who you might look up to as successful, that they're a Watson as much as you are, perhaps. So it's a very human response, I think, for good and for bad, that we like to look at someone in trouble and either put ourselves in that position in empathy, sympathy, or feel slightly superior.
I think it's interesting hearing you talk about the ways that if writers, want to be published, want to get on podcasts, you need to interact with that balance of being both vulnerable and professional, I guess, in the way that you've written Vanessa in the book, because she tries very hard to be seen as this untouchable, mythic, dancing goddess on a sugar snap cookie. I don't know. I guess I'm just curious about that idea of the myth and of characters trying to kind of, because Ivan Roland and Barton do it too, where they're trying to maintain their professional image. I guess I'm just curious about why you feel the need to throw those characters under the bus. Let's go with that.
Well, Roland, yeah, that's a good point, actually. That the ones who are trying to be most competent and professional, the ones I'm the nastiest about.
Outwardly nasty, not in a they probably did the murder way, but in a they're just awful human beings, regardless of if they did it or not.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, there are awful human beings out there, and particularly with Barton. There were some politicians in particular that I was going, mate, you really annoy me in real life. It's going into the book. So, to be honest, those characters are a lot of fun, genuinely, to write. People will often say about writing the baddies is so much more fun than writing the goodies. And even though, because spoilers, just because we're saying baddies doesn't mean that they've done the murder. Maybe they have, maybe they have not.
Maybe they have. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Read the book, find out. It's such a joy. I giggle away. And I mean, and you think about people that you deal with, Roland, that sort of small bureaucrat wanting to be the dictator, is such annoying people in real life that it's an absolute joy to write them on the page. And also sometimes then to subvert a bit, to set up in a certain way. And this is something I really enjoyed doing. We've sort of talked already about, you've got Carol as you would think the classic cop who's going to be the main character of the book, but she's not. We referenced Janet earlier, but we haven't really talked about her much, but she's kind of the Miss Marple character that you would expect, but that's not quite how it turns out either. So I love taking those sort of classic tropes of your usual crime characters and then subverting them a little bit. And that includes also, just sometimes the very annoying people in life who've got projections of themselves as being somehow much bigger than what they are and bring them down a peg or two. Lots of fun.
No, I think that subversion angle is obviously really powerful. Janet, you say she's Miss Marple. I see her as every old lady in a murder mystery who secretly knows exactly what's going on, but nobody talks to them.
Yeah.
Except that Janet is always talking to people, but she doesn't tell them anything directly useful.
Yeah.
I really enjoy
absolutely.
that.
One of those that sort of, very like as Carol, the police officer. So Janet is the type of character who has got a list of suspects put in her winter coat pocket just in case she's ever found murdered.
It's Roger. Roger did it. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And Carol, the police officer, can see why Janet would get murdered. But I wanted to at the start as well, as a bit of, and this is why Carol doesn't believe that it's a murder at the start, is that the people who are saying it's a murder are kind of the powerless. And I was kind of interested in that sort of generations of power, that we've got essentially the baby boomers going into Gen X, maybe slightly millennials. They're the people who kind of are running the town and all the important positions of power here. So if you're above that and the generation above, you're not really getting listened to, and you're certainly not getting listened to if you're 15 and 16, which is a couple of other characters that we haven't mentioned. But it's the generation above and the generation below that when you're sort of the ones without power, you're also probably the most observant, because you're having to work out who's in power and how do I get my way when I'm actually quite powerless. And in particular, the teenagers, they've got a pretty sharp eye for how things really work and what they're going to have to do to get noticed. And also they're, kind of snooping around as well and have run across a few clues that suddenly become a lot more relevant. So I liked playing around with people who are not getting listened to and what they're going to do. Well, and that's true for a lot of the characters, actually, what you will do to get attention. Now, what Vanessa wants to do to get attention because she wants to be famous again is quite different from what some of the other characters will do. But that whole I want attention, I need attention, whether it's for a good reason or whether it's just because I want to be famous, was something I was playing with it as well.
I want to dive back on I've been calling them Scooby Gang, the kids, Jazz and Brianna and Danny and others. I love that the kids, because as always, it takes a town and all kinds of people in the town. You got to find a place for the young kids to make a difference. They have a really great time solving piece of the mystery and kind of acting above what we expect of them. I think Danny in particular, though they all kind of have their own moment in the sun, I'd like to know how you went about making the Scooby-Doo gang hijinks of the school kids meaningful, giving them a place and a stake in the plot, allowing them to uncover things while still kind of keeping it realistic. I'd love to know about that.
Yeah, it was really fun to write. And you always think about the great writers that you like to borrow from. In particular, there's a couple of things that I actually saw Mick Herron do in his fantastic series that I thought, oh, that's interesting. And can I take that little bit of a device and pull it even further? So for whatever reason, I really do love writing about teenagers. My first book, the main character was a teenager. My second book, there's a whole teenage section that sort of it's in the past, but the past is teenagers and then present day is adults. And I think that might get back to what you were alluding before about childhood being so important and it always stays with you. That time of life when you're kind of furious that you're getting thwarted at every turn by the adults around you to actually do what you want to do. And you're seeing that the adults aren't that great. Like they're stuffing up, they're making mistakes, they're being boring. And there's that energy of you want to change the world. Now, particularly Jazz is very much into that because she is the local politician's stepdaughter. So she is just disgusted with him. He's one of the reprehensible people we were talking about earlier. So she's got good reason, quite frankly. And also it's the state of the world. If I was a teenager now, I'd be furious too. Jazz represents it a lot. She's trying to do her climate change protests. She's trying to stop her stepfather's reprehensible actions and, these draconian new protest laws that are being brought in. Amidst the jokes, there's some serious stuff that's not the main focus, but it's there because in life it's there as well, is that they're sort of going, you guys are doing a terrible job. Get out of the way and let us do it. And so part of that is saying, you're not solving anything. If we want this solved, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And in one sense, that's a funny position to take. But in another sense, it's an absolutely logical position to take, is that just, get out of my way. And Jazz, more so than the others, but the other two as well, is like, yep, I've got this. I'm going to solve what's going on.
I just really love that all these characters can still show their own power and taking back control of their lives, I guess. I think that's really cool.
Little acts of rebellion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I think that's represented really well.
Lovely. Thank you.
Aoife Clifford there, talking about her novel It Takes a Town with Herds. If you want to catch more of Aoife Clifford's work, you can always dive back even further into the archives and hear our discussion about her previous novel, When We Fall. Thank you for joining us here on Death of the Reader. My name is Flex, and I'm out of here.